Orange rivers are bleeding through Alaska right now. More than 200 waterways are turning toxic. The cause? It's waking up underground, and nearly 700 old military dump sites are thawing open at the same time. Now, that's not a metaphor. That's happening right now. And I need you to stay with me on this one because this story starts with legends, then moves through memory, and then slams into data so ugly it makes those old legends feel like warning labels that we threw away. People talk about Alaska like it's clean by default, the last frontier, endless ice, pure water, empty land. No, it was never empty land, and it was never clean. And now the ground is cracking open. Now, before I hit you with the report and the numbers and the maps, I need to take you where this fear actually started. Not in a lab, not in some military office. In stories people told each other to stay alive. In parts of western Alaska, people talked about the Amakuk. If you've never heard of that name, well, hear it now. The Amakuk lives inside the ground. Not on it, inside it. People described it as slimy and leathery at the same time, with 4 human arms and no legs, in a shape that could change whenever it wanted to. It didn't walk. It swam through the frozen earth. I know how that sounds, but listen to what people kept repeating. They said patches of hard ground could suddenly go soft under your feet, soft like the earth had been hollowed out from below. Soft like quicksand with no warning. You'd step and then your boot would sink. Then you'd try to pull back and then the ground would move with you. Not collapse, just move. The way old hunters told it, the Amakuk traveled by digging through frozen layers and left behind these weak spots. So if you grew up hearing that, you learn these 2 rules. Rule number 1, if frozen ground feels warm, move. And then rule 2, if the ground that should hold your weight starts shifting under you, don't stop to figure out why, just run. Because people didn't stop to figure it out. And then some of them never came back. There's another story that lives right next to that one. The Kilu, a black dog spirit with a hairless body, eyes that lock you in place. And that stare does something to you. It scrambles your brain. People said if the Kila looked at you, your sense of direction would just snap. North, south, the trail, river, home, all gone. You wander in circles until the cold or hunger or until panic got you. Then it would eat what is left. And the Kila had one detail that never leaves your head once you hear it. Its paw pads were furred, not furry paws, but furred pads. So even when it walked across the snow, it left almost no tracks. You could hear something moving, you could feel something watching you, but you couldn't follow a print because there was no prints to follow. Now, put those stories in a place where people disappear in numbers that nobody can explain away. The Alaska Triangle. For over 50 years, around 20,000 people have gone missing in that area. 20,000. That number doesn't get less weird the longer you sit with it. It gets worse because you start doing the math. That's roughly 400 people a year, every year for half a century, in a state with fewer people than most big cities. And I'm not talking about one trail where somebody got lost on one bad weekend. I'm talking about a massive stretch from Anchorage up towards Juneau and then out towards Utkadvik, a zone tied together by case after case after case of vanishing people, crashed planes, failed searches, no remains and no answers. People love to brush this off as campfire talk. Then they see that number, 20,000, missing in 50 years. Do the math in your head. That's not a fluke. That's an actual pattern. There's one spot inside that zone that keeps showing up in stories from people who work those woods and those waters. Thomas Bay, Devil's Country. The name alone should tell you something. People who lived and worked in Southeast Alaska didn't throw that label around for fun. They called it Devil's Country because something about that place made tough, experienced men uneasy in a way that they couldn't explain. In 1900, a prospector named Harry Culp wrote about what he saw there. He described this crescent-shaped lake sitting in brutal terrain, steep mountains, thick growth that swallowed sound when the wind stopped. The kind of place that you could yell and the trees would eat it. Fire a rifle and hear the crack just stop like the air refused to carry it. And around that lake, he said that he saw some creatures, not human, about 4 feet tall, moving in ways that didn't make any sense for the terrain. Culp was shaken so badly, he didn't want to go back. And this was a prospector, a man who walked into the wilderness for a living. That story got laughed off by people who were never there. Then in 1925, a trapper went out looking for his missing dog in the same area. He never came back. His gear or remains were never found. No sight of what happened to him after he walked into those woods. That combination sticks with you. Harry Culp in 1900, crescent-shaped lake, 4-foot creatures, then a trapper in 1925 disappearing while looking for a missing dog, in a place where people already whispered about a dog spirit that could erase your sense of direction and leave no tracks. You don't have to force that connection, it just kind of sits there. Now, if you've never been around permafrost country, you need to understand this part. The ground up there has always been part surface, part frozen history. Layers of ice holding roots and bones and old camps, old fuel and old mistakes. People who live there read the ground the same way that you would read a stop sign. They know where it should give. When the elders told stories about things moving underground, they were also teaching something real. Respect unstable ground, respect hidden channels, respect places where winter and thaw don't act right. When hunters heard the Keelut stories, yeah, it was creepy, but it was also a survival rule. Don't wander off alone in whiteout conditions when your head goes sideways. Stop, mark your spot, and then get your bearings, and then survive. Field and fieldcraft got woven together. And modern Alaska started showing us scenes that made those old warnings look like they had been literal the whole time. People started posting videos of rivers running bright orange. Bright orange water winding through the valleys where streams used to run clear enough to drink from. At first, people online joked about camera filters. Then satellite pictures confirmed it. Massive stretches of Arctic waterways were changing color. At first, agencies called it unusual, and then researchers started counting. Then the count got past 200 waterways. And you're hearing me right, more than 200 waterways. And in village conversations, old words started coming back. Ground turning strange, water changing taste, fish acting different, and routes people trusted suddenly feeling wrong. I keep coming back to this because it matters for what's next. Long before any government memo, these communities already had language for danger in the land. They didn't have chemical terms. They had stories. Stories about things under the ground. And stories about places that take people. And stories about terrain that pretends to be solid until it opens up. Because when you zoom out from the Amakuk, the Keelut, and the Alaskan Triangle, Thomas Bay, Harry Culp, and then lay modern maps on top of all those old fear zones, you see something that stops feeling like a myth and starts feeling physical. The ground is changing faster than anyone can keep up with. Frozen layers that held everything in place are failing. What was buried is now moving. What was trapped is now flowing. And the people who warned that Earth itself could turn on you weren't telling bedtime stories. They were trying to keep each other alive in a place where one wrong step might just be your last. Now, let me make a clean pivot, because this is where the story changes. The U-Pick didn't have a word for PCBs, and now we have satellite pictures that prove why they needed one. That sentence should bother you as much as it bothers me, For generations, families on western Alaska's coasts and rivers built their whole lives around fish, seals, and birds, berries, and ice routes. Their knowledge tracked weather shifts, animal migrations, dangerous currents, and thinning ice, and sickness with the precision that people in offices still don't give them credit for. But when industrial chemicals and military waste got into the food chain, there was no old word for PCB, because there'd never been a reason to name that poison before outsiders brought it in. No word for PFAS, no ancient term for mercury piling up in fish because of the ground chemistry just got wrecked. And now we've got satellite proof. Orange water signatures across more than 200 waterways. The frozen archive cracking open and dumping chemicals into rivers people still depend on. So this isn't folklore versus science. This is folklore first, science late. The old story said the danger lived below. Modern tools finally just caught up. That's the turn. Now let's hit the real horror. Alaska has roughly 700 formerly used defense sites, FUDs, scattered across remote and strategic locations from old military activity. These aren't neat, sealed-off museums. A lot of them have abandoned buildings, buried junk, and leftover fuel, solvents, heavy metals, old dumps, and in some spots, unexploded bombs. All left over from Cold War panic and World War II build-outs where speed mattered more than cleanup. Some sites got partly cleaned up, a lot didn't, but some were well documented and plenty weren't. And now, the permafrost is breaking open the ground that used to act like a lid. When that lid breaks, the bad stuff moves. It flows, it thaws, it cracks, it runs off in channels and groundwater, in stream systems that feed villages, and fish habitats, and routes that families used to get food. Here's where people get it wrong. They hear old contamination and picture something sitting still, fenced off, handled. No, that's not the case. In a warming Arctic, old contamination becomes new contamination. The map isn't a museum, it's a fuse. The rusting rivers data made it impossible to pretend otherwise. A big 2024 paper in Nature got national attention, showing how fast these orange, metal-heavy streams were spreading across Alaska. It's linked to permafrost breaking down and exposing minerals that create acid when they hit oxygen and water. That chemical reaction releases metals into water: iron, zinc, copper, nickel, lead, just to name a few. It drops the pH and wrecks systems that were built for cold, stable, low mineral conditions. When that chemistry flips, the fish don't get a warning. Gills burn first. Young fish die first. In Kobuk Valley, one stream lost every single juvenile Dolly Varden and slimy sculpin, every single one that they surveyed. A river turning orange makes for a dramatic photo. A food web collapsing is quieter. It starts with a missing young fish, then missing predators, then empty banks where families had been pulling dinner for generations. Then the NOAA's 2025 Arctic Report Card backed up the bigger picture. 2024 through 2025 was the warmest Arctic year in about 125 years of records. Think about that. Then picture 700 old military dump sites sitting in that thawing ground. This is why you hear people saying it out loud now. Permafrost is not permanent anymore. That line should end every argument about waiting. And Dolly Varden aren't just some random fish to the people up there. They're food, their timing, their culture, their decisions about where to travel, what to dry, what to share, and what to store for winter. When young fish populations collapse, the people who depend on them for food get hit first, then household budgets, then health, because you just don't swap a river food for a grocery store in remote Alaska overnight. Now stack that with the drinking water problem, and a lot of communities rely on surface water and shallow systems that are directly exposed to this runoff and this erosion. Treatment systems vary wildly depending on the location and the funding. Monitoring can miss sudden spikes, and once people stop trusting their water, they switch to bottled water. which is expensive, unreliable, and humiliating when you live off your land like your ancestors drank from. The contamination story isn't one chemical. It's a pileup: military leftovers, mining waste, airborne pollution, mercury getting into fish, metals released by messed up chemistry. They all crash together with warmer temperatures, more wildfires, and more erosion, and more failing infrastructure, and less predictable freeze-thaw timing. I want you to hear how all these threads connect. Legend says the ground can turn on you. Science says thaw is breaking down frozen systems. Public records say roughly 700 military sites sit on that thawing ground. And satellite images say over 200 waterways are showing up orange contamination signals. That's not just one bad headline, that's a system falling apart across a stretch of land bigger than most people can picture. And in Alaska, distance hides the damage from people who don't live there. Most Americans couldn't point to these villages on a map. A contamination plume in the village water supply doesn't trend for very long in the lower 48 news cycles. And that's what makes this next part so unsettling, because while nobody's watching, the maps are lining up. Pull up a map of those 700 military dump sites. Now, pull up a map of the Orange Rivers, and then pull up a map of the Alaskan Triangle disappearances. They all overlap. Not perfectly, but enough to make your stomach drop. The corridors where people have been vanishing for decades are sitting on top of thawing ground that's now bleeding poison into the water. The places elders warned their kids to avoid. A lot of them are right on top of the old military sites that nobody ever fully cleaned up. I'm not saying someone planned that. I'm saying the land has been screaming the same warning for a very long time, and the warnings kept getting ignored because they came wrapped in stories instead of spreadsheets. Think about what the Amakuk story actually describes if you strip the legend away. Something lives in the frozen ground and moves unseen. It leaves behind these soft, unstable patches where solid ground used to be. And if you step on one of those patches, the earth swallows you. Now look up thermokarst collapse. That's the scientific term for what happens when permafrost thaws and the ground above it caves in. The surface looks normal, hard, frozen, safe. Then the ice underneath melts, a pocket opens, and then the ground drops. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. Sometimes it takes a trail with it, and sometimes it could take a building or a person. Researchers have documented sinkholes opening overnight in parts of Alaska. Ground that held weight for centuries just letting go, swallowing whatever was on top. Tell me that doesn't sound like the Amakuk. Tell me the people who came up with that story weren't describing exactly what's happening right now, just without the vocabulary to name it. And Keelut, the black dog with no tracks that scrambles your mind until you wander to death. There's a documented effect in Arctic conditions called spatial disorientation. Whiteout, flat light, featureless terrain. Your brain literally loses the ability to tell up from down, let alone north from south. Experienced pilots have flown straight into the ground because of their senses told them they were actually climbing. Hunters with decades of knowledge have walked in circles until they've collapsed. No tracks to follow, no landmarks to anchor to, just a slow scramble of everything you thought you knew where you were. The old story said a spirit did that to you. Modern day data says the environment does. The result is the same. You wander, you get lost, and you don't come back. But here's the part that keeps me up at night. The Orange Rivers aren't just ugly, they're toxic. And the metals in that water just don't kill fish. Some of them affect your brain: lead, manganese, cadmium, neurotoxins. In high enough doses, they mess with cognitive, coordination, decision making. They can make you confused. They slow your reaction. They make you make bad calls in situations where a bad call is all it takes. People in these areas drink from these waterways. They eat the fish that swim in them. They've been doing it their entire lives, so ask yourself this. In a region where hundreds of people vanish every year, where the water is now laced with metals that affect how your brain works, where the ground itself is collapsing underneath you, how many of these disappearances were really just getting lost? And how many people whose judgment got quietly poisoned before they ever set foot on a trail that was already falling apart underneath them? The question doesn't have a clean answer, and that's what makes it terrifying. Frozen ground was never a trash can, it was a vault. And we treated it like the lock that would hold forever. Well, now it's open. In villages where boots sink into sudden soft spots and streams run orange where they used to run clear, people aren't shocked. Some of them just nod and say what their grandparents said. Something's moving below. I'm not telling you the Amakuk is real. I'm telling you the thing the Amakuk warned about is real. Danger hiding under stable ground, invisible until it's too late. And I'm not telling you the Keelut is hunting people across the snow, but I am telling you that something in that landscape strips people of their ability to find their way home. And it might not just be the weather doing it anymore. So when somebody tells you Alaska is untouched, remember that black hairless dog crossing the snow without leaving a single track. And then remember the satellite images showing orange veins spreading across more than 200 waterways as the frozen ground cracks open underneath them. One came from old fear, one came from modern sensors. Both warnings about something invisible, something patient, something that kills slow until it kills all at once. The ground is opening up, and we're still standing on it for tonight. If you made it this far, comment Amakuk down below. Let's see if you can spell that right. I'll see you in the next video.